It's always humbling to be in engagements such as this and to have the opportunity to share. Moments when to see the best that humanity and our combined faiths represent and are able to achieve together when we take this kind of time. And I'm humbled in being asked to share a few insights from my tradition, from what Judaism has taught me in my life. Of course, how do you condense a few thousand years of Jewish law and ideas and philosophy and practice into a few minutes? And please understand, there is no such thing as unanimity in Jewish theology. Same goes with philosophy. As we say, you ask 3 Jews what God is, and you'll get 5 opinions. So with that reality, I'll attempt an explanation. A Jewish perspective of altruism. Maybe it's best to start with a rabbi who seemed to have forgotten what this might be. Well, this particular rabbi got into a car accident with a priest. Both cars were totally demolished, completely, nothing left. Amazingly, though, neither of the two of them were hurt. The rabbi climbs out of his car and he looks across and sees the priest climbing out of his car, and they're both fine, and he sees the priest's collar and realizes who he is. And he says, "You're a priest." He goes, "I'm a rabbi." He said, "Obviously this is divine providence. Obviously God has protected us, but even more, obviously God has brought us together so that we could build bridges, so that we could share in our communities." And the rabbi looks over at his car that's totaled, and he says, and look at this, there's a bottle of kosher wine, of Manischewitz in the back seat here. This has been so that we could celebrate this moment, the two of us. And so he says, how blessed this is. And the rabbi takes the top off the wine, he hands it to the priest, and the priest takes a drink of it, a second drink of it, and he hands it back to the rabbi to celebrate, and the rabbi puts the top back on the wine, and the priest says, "Aren't you going to have some?" The rabbi says, "No, I'll have some after the police arrive." So we can agree that such behavior is not altruism. But what really is the meaning of this ideal? Well, actually, if we delve into it, what seems most consistent is that altruism must entail action. So I'll begin with the very word we use for it in Hebrew, which is tzedek. Of course, the word has several different meanings. It can mean charity, or justice, or righteousness. In the Torah, in our scripture, specifically in Deuteronomy, we're commanded tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice must you pursue. And while the commentators tell us these commandments were given to help us establish a court and a legal system, Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, the 11th century French commentator, interprets the reason the Hebrew word tzedek is repeated is that not only must justice be enforced in how we operate our society, but it also must be utilized for ourselves as individuals. In other words, at all times, we must be insistent that our own actions are imbued with righteousness. But allow me to jump back to Torah, to the very beginning, to Genesis, with the first human, Adam. Over 2,000 years ago, the rabbis who interpret the story of creation tell us God created only one human being to start creation, in order to teach that even if one human is hurt, or is in pain, or is distressed, it is as if the entire world is tormented. And it is the Jewish individual's role in our world to help and to fix and to care. Now skip ahead with me to the end of Torah, forward again to Deuteronomy, where that word tzedek is repeated twice and repeatedly used. Where this entire book of Hebrew scripture is filled with law after law after law. Yes, laws about worship and about our holy days, but mostly laws about creating a just society. Laws about how we can live our lives. Laws about very technical and specific things that might not seem so significant. For instance, we learn if we build a house with a roof upon it, there must be a parapet, a fence around the roof. It's the builder's responsibility. Or the laws about lost animals, that if you find an ox wandering, you must actively return it to its owner, even if the ox belongs to your enemy. Or you can't hold as collateral the clothes that keep an individual warm. And on and on and on the laws continue. But what's most significant is one concept within all of these instructions, couched among hundreds of laws, is this one unifying and significant phrase, Lo tuchal l'chit'alem. You must not be indifferent. And I think that's the most important ideal which should guide us in our lives. No matter what, we cannot be indifferent. Yes, it's one thing to do that which is right, a charitable thing, the just thing when it's apparent what to do. But it's an entirely different thing to get actively involved, to stand up for injustice, to realize our responsibility in so doing, to realize we're commanded to do so. To give a modern spin, we can refer to Elie Wiesel's condemnation, not of the Nazi, because he expected hate from the Nazi, but of the neighbors who watched Jews being carted away and said and did nothing. Instead, they closed their shutters and said it wasn't their problem. Or maybe we think of the bankers, lawyers, who watched millions, no billions being made on what they knew were bogus transactions, or bogus loans, mortgages that didn't work, and said nothing. Or the CFO, an accountant of a toy company, who knows that it would cost more to fix the broken part of a child's toy to demand a recall than it would result from the lawsuits that follow the catastrophes. Indifference is complacence. Indifference is easy. And Judaism says we are not allowed to be indifferent. The Salie, the altruist, is not painted as perfect, far from it. Just so you never get carried away, the biblical author makes it clear that righteousness, though divine, is not an inherent trait. Rather, it's learned. You have to practice it constantly. In Talmud and the tractates of Jewish law, the ancient rabbis taught mitzvah, gerer mitzvah. One good deed, the following of one commandment, leads to another good deed, the following of another commandment. And that is how tzedakah, how righteousness, how altruism is born. It will not arrive directly from the womb and poof, come out miraculously. Rather, we have to work at it constantly in our daily lives, in everything that we do. But if these acts, they tell us what we must be thinking of those at all times that our world might not be thinking of. At the Jewish holiday of Passover, we're bombarded by an expression that's repeated throughout the Torah. You were slaves in the land of Egypt. You, our ancestors, and now by extension us, know the feelings of slavery, of hardship, of oppression. And we're commanded not only don't oppress others, but make sure that no one is oppressed by another. Obviously, the at-risk populations were constantly taken advantage of. So in Jewish law, the disenfranchised, the widow, the orphan, the stranger who lives among us are given extraordinary rights so as to protect them. Because the defenseless are always at risk. Protecting and defending the truly vulnerable is the utmost act of justice. And it's what God demands. Actually, the Talmud gives us a breakdown of human nature, and what I believe is the most realistic approach. The ancient rabbis divide us up into 4 categories. The Rasha, the one who's evil. The Benuim, the one who is indifferent. The Mensch, best described as a caring and feeling human being. And finally, the Salie, the truly righteous one. Our tradition seems to be aware that most people fall into the first and second categories. Individuals so self-absorbed that they may not even see what's going on, or if they do, they don't care. And then there are those Benuim, the neither here nor there people, who aren't really bad. They care, but they just don't really want to get involved. Maybe it's time, or it's fear, or it's lack of motivation. The Mensch, that third category of person, will go out of their way for another. cares enough even to take a risk at times in helping others. But the tzaddik, the truly heroic altruist, is someone quite different and directed by faith. The tzaddik will defend people who society has cast out. The tzaddik, the truly righteous, even will risk his life and the life of his family. And such behavior isn't innate or inherent. Rather, such action, and action is what it must be, such righteousness is produced because of a deep well of faith. If you look at those in history who've risked everything, whether to save Jews during the Holocaust or to save Rwandans during massacres or any of the incredible examples we find in history where people like that were inspired and motivated by a religious ideal, by what God gave them strength to do. Allow me to return to where I began, to the Torah, to the beginning of the book of Genesis. Because ultimately, I think that deep-rooted faith comes from the very first story of creation. When God created humanity, we learn God made us B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God we each were made. And that ideal, that reality, continues to be true today. Whether Jew, Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, secular, humanist, all created in God's image. And therefore, when we're able, we go beyond the expected to help, to make a difference, and to never remain indifferent. For me, as a Jew, as a rabbi, that defines altruism. And I'll also tell you that if our automobiles, our cars, ever do collide, and we walk away from the accident, I promise, together we'll share in that celebration and that joy. Thank you.